All right, thanks for coming. This is a finance lesson on October 16th, 2016. Thanks for joining us, all 200 of you on YouTube and 600 on Periscope. So I think today's quote-unquote lesson or review or whatever you want to call these things is probably the most, I think, interesting one I've put together yet. It's probably the most advanced one, so it may not make sense to everyone from the perspective that it requires that you've watched the other ones at least and probably have even more knowledge beyond that. But I thought I'd sort of start to evolve what we've been doing. And we always have to look at companies and investment opportunities with the perspective that we're trying to make good investments. And we started off just sort of understanding what financial statements a company provides, and then seeing what we can divine from that. And what's interesting is it's a very iterative process, and a lot of the young investors I meet, after I teach them the very first elements of the process, they sort of decide that they're the greatest investors who ever lived and don't need any more understanding. But the reality is that financial statements are probably like many things. They look very simple, but they're inordinately complex. What you can divine from them is more complicated than you can even imagine. And we're going to go a little bit further into that with respect to something called capital efficiency a little later. And like most lessons, again, we have a company that we're going to use we're using it more as a muse or a conversation piece than we are as a serious examination into the company. But of course, we're going to try to examine it as best as we can in a few hours. And that company is called Checkpoint. Ticker is CHKP. It's a software company. And we're going to look at that, and then we're going to talk also about Warren Buffett. I like to talk about great investors, and Warren Buffett is arguably the greatest of all time. And I'm an avid Buffettologist. I'd say he's influenced me in my investing more than anyone else, and we'll talk about Buffett quite a bit. So where do we get started? Well, maybe we can talk about what capital efficiency is, because it's going to dive into it's going to be related to kind of what we're talking about. And you've probably seen at some point some of these ratios, like return on assets, return on equity, return on book, tangible book, invested capital, etc. And what you probably haven't seen is something called the Buffett return. And I actually have this book. Let me run and get it real quick because it's pretty important. And it'll tell you something important about how I do what I do. Of course, I can't find it now. Oh, it's right here. Funny how that works. It's called The Money Masters. It's by John Train. I think it's out of print, so you got to find a used copy. I had a first edition copy, and I gave it away to somebody, which is foolish, so I had to go buy this on Amazon for $3, which is a very good investment, but the entire thing's marked up pretty bad. Anyway, it's if you're familiar with Jack Schwager's books, which I also recommend, John Train wrote the first Jack Schwager book before probably Schwager was even born. And what's interesting about this book is that it's sort of similar to the Schwager books. It goes through investor by each chapter is an investor, and the first chapter is about Warren Buffett, and it's got some things in here that nobody knows about Warren Buffett, which is pretty cool because you would think someone who's the most successful investor ever, the richest man in the world, that's somebody that has been studied and sort of, everybody knows everything about Warren Buffett. But the reality is, there's things in here that are really not understood about Warren Buffett. And one of those is the so-called Buffett return, which is a ratio, which we'll talk about in a second. But what is capital efficiency? And like all of these, I sort of put the new things that I am writing in red, and I put the old things in black. So each lesson you can see what I added to our little PowerPoint. Our PowerPoint's now like 74, 75, 73 slides. So it's almost not quite a book, but it'll be a book sooner or later. So what is capital efficiency? Well, I define it as capital efficiency as a concept, and I think that's really important, is that we are always taught in probably it comes from school, where we're taught to memorize things and not think about the concepts behind them. And in business, investing, and finance, it's way more important. It's important in chemistry, it's important in math, but in business and finance, I'd say it's the most crucial, where you actually have to understand concepts and not formulas. And so the concept of capital efficiency is that we're comparing a business's assets, the assets that that business requires to generate a profit, with the amount of profit being generated. So that's a simple concept, but it actually is extremely tricky to sort of understand. For instance, what assets are required to generate a profit, and that's maybe the hardest part of this. And so is it desirable or undesirable? Obviously, if you think about it from a plain perspective, you'd much rather, let's say you needed $1 million of capital to make $1, that would not be a capital efficient business. If you needed $1 to make $1 million, that would be an extremely capital efficient business. And why is capital efficiency important? Obviously, as return goes to zero, you could have alternative returns, right? You could decide not to make that capital investment and instead take your capital and put it in something returning higher. The other concept is that there's volatility around this quote-unquote capital. And what is the capital we're talking about? Well, we're actually talking about the balance sheet. So we're talking about things like inventories and property, plant, and equipment mostly. So and this becomes a very, very interesting conversation. Let's look at some examples. Apple is one of the most capital efficient companies that exists. So let's pull up an Apple Apple financial statements, we'll say. And so let's see, last quarter, Apple generated, well, let's just say for the last 4 quarters, Apple generated about 50, 60, and 70 billion in cash flow for the trailing 12 months for the last 4 quarters, going backwards 3 times. So on average, they're making about 60 billion on a full annualized rate. So the book is called The Money Masters, and it's by John Train. I'm sure it'll go out of print. It's been out of print. I'm sure it'll go more out of print tonight. But it actually talks about some wonderful investors, and you've never heard of. One that's really fascinating is actually a guy who just died, is Robert Wilson, who was a New York trader who was extremely successful that, again, almost nobody's ever heard of. So these old books can sometimes be rather nice. I like how they say the go-go hedge fund days of the 60s, which is pretty humorous to anyone who's been in the hedge fund industry recently. So anyway, let's get back to Apple. So Apple's made $60 billion on an annualized basis, so on a 4-quarter trailing basis. And so the question is, what did it take for them to make $60 billion? We all want businesses that make cash flow, or at least I do. And I know others don't. But I certainly want to make as much cash flow as possible for my businesses. And the question is, every business needs assets to create those cash flows. And on a balance sheet, it's supposed to be a complete, comprehensive description of a company's entire asset base. And there's concepts like off-balance sheet assets, and we don't have to get into those. But in general, by law, the balance sheet has to contain every asset the company has. And the assets of Apple look pretty simple. You have 230 billion in cash and 305 billion in total assets. So really, if you exclude the cash, you're left with 72 billion of quote-unquote real assets. But you can actually take that a little further. Buffett defines in this book, the Money Masters, again, something I don't think he's ever talked about publicly, other than in this book, which almost nobody's read, that he looks at the asset base as the firm assets, which is maybe an old name for property, plant, and equipment, and inventories. And why are those assets that are consume capital? And so basically, the way you look at it is inventories, you have to spend money to make your inventory, right? And you hold that inventory and you hope to sell it for a higher price, because that's what a business is. You make something and then you sell it for a higher price. How much higher? That's up to the market. But that inventory is capital that's being consumed. You have to hold that capital. Apple, for instance, here has about $2.2 billion of inventories. Presumably, those go into, any accounting student knows this, goes into raw materials, work in progress, and finished goods. So raw materials would be, I don't know, glass. I don't know what Apple holds in their stores, in their inventories, but something like that. Finished goods is probably the bulk of it, where they have finished iPods and iPads that they're and iPhones most especially, where they're going to be reselling those to retailers, for instance. So inventories are capital that you have to put up that money, right? So before you sell a product, you actually have to spend the money to make that product. And that's capital. That's capital that you have to put into the business. And if you're a retailer, and we'll see those in a second, the capital you have to put into your business is enormous, because the margins you're making on your resale are very limited. Whereas the amount of money you have to put in your inventory relative to the amount of money you're making, that's what capital efficiency is all about. Property, plant, and equipment is the most interesting part about all of this. Property, plant, and equipment, of course, is any expenditure that its expected life is greater than 1 year, right? So that includes things like buildings and plants and all those types of things. And so basically what's really remarkable, and this kind of dawned on me as a young investor maybe 10 years ago or 7 years ago, inventory is usually valued at cost, to answer that question. What's really remarkable, and this should blow your mind for a second, Apple is worth $600 billion. They're making $60 billion a year. That's 10 times earnings. But what's amazing is if you look at this property, plant, and equipment, think for a second about this. $23 billion of property, plant, and equipment. What does that mean? Does anyone have an idea? Take a guess. Apple has $23 billion of property, plant, and equipment. How do you interpret that? Think about that for a minute. It really is an interesting way to think about it. Not much signs of intelligence on the Periscope. Let's take a look at YouTube. No sign of life detected. Although the YouTube chat often messes up, so let's see. Here we go. Well, we know what PP&E is. I'm not asking you to define PP&E. Everybody knows what PP&E is. It's, again, machines, real estate, things like that. And no one's really getting it, which is great, because I feel so proud of myself for understanding this as a young investor. The theory, the reason this is fascinating, Apple's entire property, plant, and equipment is worth $23 billion. Why is that so interesting? The market cap is $600 billion, okay? But the entire, you could recreate the entire Apple business if you had $23 billion. And there are people with $23 billion. You could actually replicate, think about, trying to copy something, photocopy something. You could actually replicate all of Apple for $23 billion, right? That's all it would cost you. The current value of all of their assets. Imagine making a Apple in a copycat Apple. We'll call it Crapple. And this Crapple company, you could actually recreate every machine, every desk, every office, everything in the whole company with $23 billion. But why is the company worth $600 billion? That's the interesting part. There are businesses where you can generate a high return. So if we add this up, we get that they're making $63 billion off of $23 billion every year. So that's a 250% return. There's no hedge fund on the planet that has that kind of return. And so they're arguably the best investors ever. So obviously if you recreated this company, Apple, with your new brand name, it would not have the same brand loyalty and brand value, and you wouldn't have the same revenue and earnings. But there are businesses that you've never heard of that don't have that kind of brand loyalty. They're much different. They're business-to-business companies, and they're a good example is pharmaceuticals. Doctors don't care what company makes a drug. They don't say, oh, well, I don't trust this diabetes drug because it's not made by Merck. No, they prescribe the drug if it's safe and effective, and they don't really care if Merck made it or your new startup pharmaceutical company made it. There are businesses where it totally doesn't matter what your brand is. And there are companies where you could completely recreate a business like this and generate high returns. And that's sort of the essence of arbitrage. And there's other sort of reasons why these moats exist. And Warren Buffett was one of the first investors to sort of understand that there's something about looking at return on capital, whether you define that capital as assets or book value or whatever you want to define it as, Warren Buffett's inventory plus firm capital. At some point, what you're realizing is that the higher that return, the more likely there is to be some kind of moat or some kind of barrier that is stopping new competitors from coming in. And it's often just brand, right? It's often just, customers love Coca-Cola, they've never heard of Martin Cola, and they're not going to drink Martin Cola anytime soon. But again, in pharmaceuticals, that's not the case. That's not the case. In medical devices, that's not the case. There's often something else that's stopping these companies from coming in and competing away that fat margin. Everybody would love to, spend $20 million to make $60 million a year, to take Apple's numbers, divide them by 1,000. That's a crazy return, because not only you only have to spend that $20 million once. That's the crazy thing about Apple. They spend the $20 billion one time, and they make $60 billion every year. When you think about how insane that is, why doesn't that just disappear? Well, one reason is their phones work and they don't blow up like Samsung's, so they have a lot of brand loyalty. People love their phones. But one of the things about extremely high rates of return is that eventually they should be chipped away by competition. And it really depends on the moat. There are different moats in industry. One is sometimes you have an entrenched customer that's a moat not because of brand loyalty, but they're a moat because they're forced to be a moat. You see that a lot in software, where you can't change your software system every year. You got to kind of make your choice. Same thing works with drugs. Once you start taking drug, most people take it for many, many years. So it's interesting to sort of think about and look at return on capital and try to sort of back into what is going on at the root of the business. Why aren't there competitors coming in and taking this return? Sometimes the return is low. I'll give you an example. This is probably the highest capital efficient company there is. If I look at Ford, we got numbers down at 15%, 19% returns, and these are good years for Ford, right? I'm just looking at the last couple of quarters. We're in an economic recovery. This is the sort of time when Ford does well. There's periods where Ford will lose money, and Ford is a successful company. But in that book that I mentioned by John Train, Buffett talks about how capital inefficient companies like Ford and GM are, and they are. And these are the kinds of businesses that you would not want to replicate. For instance, the cash flow of Ford is trailing 12-month basis $13 billion. And to replicate their business, you'd have to put up $71 billion of capital. Well, that's a very different deal from Apple, right? Where $20 billion makes you $60 billion. Here, $71 billion makes you $13 billion. So it really is like it's backwards. And that's sort of the point here, is that brands matter with cars. They matter a lot less, and margins are low, customers are very price sensitive, and so forth. So when I looked at Checkpoint Software, which is the company we're going to focus on in a minute, I found this astounding return where they have virtually no capital. In fact, they don't hold inventories. They're a software company. They can't hold inventories, right? So their actual only asset is their fixed assets, which are $54 million, which are probably a couple of offices and things like that. And they make $200 million a quarter. And if you think about that, if someone said, can you scrounge together $50 million? Well, I could, a couple of friends, maybe you could. And then after that, you would make $200 million a quarter. That's almost $1 billion a year off $50 million in capital. I would love to just completely copy whatever Checkpoint's doing, maybe hire their team and go ahead and just copy everything. And if I can make half that money, a tenth of that money, I'd be happy. And that's what's fascinating about these kinds of companies. Obviously, what's important to understand is that from a stock market perspective, you don't get that same deal, right? The company got that deal. You have to pay whatever the market price is, which will be very high for a company like this. But the question really is, if it's that easy for maybe a new company to come in and say, you know what, I want to start a software security company. All I have to put up is $50 million. I could be just like Checkpoint and make $800 million a year. I make 13 times my money in my first year. Now, obviously, Checkpoint's been around 13 years, and you're not going to do that well that quickly. But it does tell you a little bit about the kind of business you're in, and most importantly, what you have to pay attention to. when you're forecasting? Because I think that's the question. You have to sort of forecast the future, and we haven't done that yet for Checkpoint. But the point is that, no pun intended, is that one has to sort of carefully think about, well, why does this business exist? Which is a very sort of existential question. But what are its customers really after? What is the company after? Why are they getting the margins they're getting? They have about 50% operating margins, which is insane, and almost no capital. How do they do this? And what's to stop? What's to keep their margins this high? What's to keep their returns this high? It doesn't seem like it's possible that they could be this high. It's sort of the old saying, easy come, easy go. And so one has to sort of think about that pretty carefully. So anyway, let's go back to Buffett a little bit. We'll probably talk about Buffett for a very, very long time. He is the greatest of all time, the GOAT investor. And I like to think of people like Buffett in the vein of Albert Einstein, who had his annus mirabilis, which translates in Latin to miracle year. And the point is that when people achieve these achievements that are otherworldly, almost supernatural, I think it's a good term to use. Buffett introduced concepts that people never anticipated in business, and like Einstein, in some ways they were probably floating around, but he sort of put them together and applied them. And what's most interesting about Buffett is he learned the Graham-Dodd school of investing and then sort of totally threw it away. Ben Graham and his professor at Columbia. And so the flow generative businesses we'll talk about at some point, but Buffett realized that on this capital efficiency stuff, what's amazing is that you could have positive working capital, so much so that you could use that working capital to invest. One moment. For instance, I define capital a little bit differently from Buffett. I like to include accounts receivable and accounts payable, because there are businesses where your customers literally give you money to hold for them. And sometimes you can actually use that money to invest. And there are some businesses where your customers expect you to give them credit. And there's the same applies with bills. There's some businesses where customers expect you to pay up front. When you go to a restaurant and you say, I'll pay you in 30 days, well, that would be actually a great result for a Fortune 500 company, but it's a terrible result for a restaurant. So restaurants expect you to pay up front. But law firms and other firms like that, you could be paying over 60 days or 90 days. So every business is different, and I think that working capital in general is something that is important to pay attention to when you think about capital efficiency. But Buffett took it to the next level when he realized that you could get float-generating businesses and use their float to do things. He also realized, I think somewhat early in his career, that private equity is the ultimate arbitrage. And this is something where he's basically strayed away from trading stocks and investing in stocks when that was sort of his beginnings. And almost all of the money he's made in the last decade, I would say, comes from private equity, from actually acquiring companies at low prices and keeping them forever. And then he sort of understood the moat concept that I talked about, and all ties into capital efficiency to some extent, but that there are companies where their discount rates when you analyze and calculate their value, their discount rates are often very close to zero, which is really remarkable. A couple other things about Buffett that are important to understand are his image and reputation. He focused on that maybe more than any investor I've ever seen. And some of it is sort of manufactured, some of it is authentic. One of the things I'll say about Buffett, you might say, well, what can I learn from Warren Buffett that somebody else hasn't? You'd be surprised. Again, I'd wager that most investors have never read this book, which is really remarkable because it has an interview with Warren Buffett that is old and reflects his thinking, and anytime you can get something like that, it's great. But I'll tell you a story. I have a friend who lives overseas, and he manages a very small hedge fund. It's somewhat insignificant, you would argue. He's a great investor. Like me, he's a big fan of Warren Buffett. What he's done is he's actually made a friendship with Warren Buffett. He's only 27 or something, And he just basically follows Buffett around. Whenever he comes to America, he tries to sort of look up what Buffett's doing. Sometimes Buffett will be giving a speech at a school or something like that, and he'll go to the speech and he'll just follow him around. And eventually, you know, Warren Buffett's a very nice man. That evening he said, "Oh, you guys came from such a long way. I'm having dinner tonight at this restaurant. Why don't you join me?" And he got to talk to Buffett for 2 hours. Just him and a couple other guys, his friends. And, you know, to be able to pick the greatest investors of all time's brain for 2 hours, he answered every question. There was not one question where he said, you know, I'm not comfortable answering that. This was last year, you know, or 2 years ago, I forget. But it wasn't, you know, 30 years ago. So even people like Buffett are you're able to sort of meet them, and if you're that interested in it all, it is possible. I'm not saying it's easy. But, you know, if you can't do that, reading books and reading everything you can about the person will probably be a pretty good replacement. So, in any event, you know, that's a little bit about Buffett. We can sort of table that. But when we talk about capital efficiency, we're going to be looking at that frequently. I built out full cash flow and models for all of these. And the point is that while capital, obviously being able to turn a small amount of money into a large amount of money is great for any corporation, that reality will be embedded in the market, right? So the price of the security will reflect that situation. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to buy Apple or Facebook because they're so capital efficient. That doesn't work that way. The reason we care about this is because when we look at a balance sheet or a cash flow statement or an income statement, we want to see the truth behind the numbers. We want to understand what is actually happening at the business level. These are more than just numbers. You see the fondness with which I type these numbers in and think about them. There are people and assets and feelings and all these things behind these numbers that tell you a story that you have to understand, especially if you have any hope of forecasting the future. And so let's sort of table that, and let's take a look at Checkpoint. So again, here's a brief model for Checkpoint, and I have everybody who submitted a model. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 models were submitted. Thank you for that. Sorry, by the way, just a quick apology. I've been out for 2 weeks. The first week I was negotiating with the 4chan company. I now have this great joke that I was going to make a fortune out of 4chan. No deal could be reached, so I'm out of the bidding, but I wish them the best, and it's a great deal for any investor who wants to get involved. I like to say that I don't like to do great deals. I like to do deals that are once in a lifetime. If I'm going to part ways with my money, I basically have to be guaranteed to make an absolute fortune. And there are investors who are willing to settle for less. And you know, when I invest a lot of money, I really have to be 100% sure that I'm going to make a total windfall. And that's often results in a bad deal for the other side. And I'm not surprised that we couldn't agree to a good deal for both of us. So in any event, the following week I was working, in the last 10 days I've been working on taxes. So I'm glad to be back, and things are a little bit back to normal for now, but as you guys all know, my life and my schedule can be pretty tumultuous. So sorry about that delay, and you know, I hope they don't happen again, but there's no guarantee that they won't. Checkpoint is doing about 1.7 billion in revenue. And again, what's kind of remarkable about this company is that they're growing. They've been growing every year for the last, I don't know, probably 10 years, but at least the last 6, 7, or 8 years. And they've been growing sort of mid-single digits to, I guess, to teens, I guess, high teens. And the margins are, again, ridiculous, or redonkulous, if you prefer. About 50% operating margins, which is like as high as they basically get. They're based in Israel, which is interesting. It's got about a 20% tax rate. So again, about 800 million to $1 billion in cash flow a year. It's about a 10 billion enterprise value. So it's actually kind of attractive if you think about it from that perspective. But you know, we have a lot of thinking to do about this company, and we're going to do that thinking today. They're an internet software security company. We've got Michael Flanagan here who submitted a model, checking in, saying it's undervalued. Again, you know, forecasting revenue growth for a company is not easy. it's more interesting to think about the risks to the business. And why are they earning the return they're earning? Why are, if they spend $50 million, right, to create their software, why wouldn't their customers just do it themselves? That's another sort of thing to think about, right? Why can't you just say, if you're their biggest customer, if you're JP Morgan or something, you say, well, why are we buying $100 million of software for these guys? Well, we can make it ourselves for $50 million. Why do we need them? What do they have that we can't? I mean, it's just money at the end of the day, right? Why can't I just copy it? And that's a really interesting question. When you sell your software for that much, and your margins are that high, what's to stop you from doing it yourself? And there's a lot of reasons to think about that. So anyway, this company basically makes software. You can think about it as firewalls, and we're going to look into all their software and things like that. They make consumer software as well. You may be familiar with their product Zone Labs, and we got to think about, well, are they an enterprise software company or are they a consumer software company? Because those are two sort of different sales. We all know that Windows comes with its innate firewalls are not very good, and I'm not sure how much they get out of Zone Labs. I know that it's been a long time since I knew this industry well, and I'm the last person who can wax poetic on security software. I don't know much about it other than maybe firewalls and things like that, but even then, I'm really not an expert. But that's where the industry research comes in, and we'll do a little bit of that today. Just reading their 20F doesn't hurt, but we're gonna sort of slow it down and take a look. But obviously, the basic understanding of their growth and their margin structure and things like that, and their history is pretty important. And so we've gotten to understand that a little bit. So let's try to take a look at some of this stuff. And I briefly looked at this, but I still can't get a sense for their entire sort of their entire business, whether it's there's a lot of different parts of security software, antivirus, anti-malware. You take a look here at all these different types of software. They have this thing called Threat Cloud, which seems kind of interesting. Let me take some notes. Next generation firewalls. If there was a security expert here, I'd really appreciate it. Software security, at least. They do have Zone Alarm. Oops. Hey, Jackson. Oh, yeah. He's something of a software security expert, isn't he? Feel free to come on Discord while we analyze this. One great way to start to look at it is go to the company's website. And, I like to read the last year of press releases. And we can also open up somebody's model and see what they've done. This is Sahil Kuruda's model, and if you're here today, just say hi. Oh, this is Intuit. Whoops, wrong company. This is Dmitry Kizyakov. He did it for Harambe, apparently, so that's great. Thank you for doing this. It's a missing link between university and CFA. Well, thank you. That's flattering. Unfortunately, this model is trash. So, oh, no, maybe not. Trashy disapproves. Wow. That is pretty hilarious. He drew a picture of my cat taking a crap. Largest pure play security vendor. Gil Shwed and Marius Nacht own 30%. Gil Shwed is considered to be the creator of the modern firewall. That's pretty cool. I don't know if Discord is up or not, but going through that, let's take a look here. Palo Alto Networks is their competitor, is that right? Threat prevention, mobile security, endpoint security, firewalls. You know, I think it's safe to say that software security is increasingly important. You know, I don't know exactly where the industry's going and things like that, but one would easily imagine it's a growth industry. So, oh, that's, sorry, hey.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. Palo Alto was founded by a checkpoint engineer. That's pretty interesting. And Palo Alto has been a very successful company. So it's amazing that, you know, you can start a software security company and become so successful. It's really remarkable in many ways. There's Q4 sales are often referred to as budget flush. You know, it's when a company says that they have budget left over and they need to sort of spend them. Seems like it's very enterprise focused. Fortinet, Cisco, Juniper. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you can take the dumb approach that software security is gonna grow by 5% forever, but you know that's obviously a very weak way of looking at the world. Now we can try it anyway, just so we can see what the market's what the market is sort of telling us about Checkpoint, which is important. Because the market may be telling us that this revenue stream is going to disappear. It may tell us that it's going to go on forever. The stock would be valued higher if it would be going on forever, so it'd be interesting to see. They do have an awful lot of cash. I think it's one of Israel's biggest companies. They're very proud of it. It should be. Okay, so I get 17 billion in enterprise value, which is about a double in the stock price. So clearly the marketplace thinks that, so I get $122 a share at 78 right now. So if they did grow at this rate, 5% per annum, which would be less than what they have been growing, that's sort of, you'd get almost a double in the stock price. So basically the idea is that the market is definitely worried that their growth will either slow or disappear or become sort of become negative. The market's extremely worried about this. It could be because Palo Alto's coming in and eating their lunch. It could be because the ball, what often happens to these companies, the ball goes somewhere else. You know, the software security becomes, it's more about DDoS, and they don't have a good DDoS platform, something like that. I know this company Cloudflare has been very successful. So everybody is different. Every concern is different. So I don't know exactly what people are worried about with respect to Checkpoint, but you can sense the worry without even talking to anybody. You can see the market's worry by just calculating the numbers, which is pretty interesting. No, Dimitri, I didn't say your model was trash. I looked at it at first, and I was scrolling, and I didn't see. I saw like just this, so it's not trash yet. Don't worry. You added the wrong cash and debt, so that's a big mistake. $3 billion mistake. Big problem, Dimitri. Big problem. So if you did this the right way, you can see that you're adding the debt and subtracting the cash, which is, cash is a good thing, and debt's the bad thing. So you want to change that, and then all of a sudden, share price is quite a lot higher, and it is a bargain. So sell P85 is a pretty big fuck up, and if you were working for me, I'd probably fire you right on the fucking spot. Piece of shit. Anyway, back to forecasting. Yeah, these forecasts, I mean, they're stupid, right? There's no intelligent sort of thought process in how you build these forecasts, which is another disgusting, just revolting part of your model that makes me sick, quite frankly. It is your first model ever, but, you know, it doesn't matter to me. There's no description of the products. I like this little, you know, Checkpoint Palo Alto thing, but, you know, how they've come from nowhere to be just as large as Checkpoint. To me, that tells me that the fact that a startup company could do with a guy from the same company, could start a company and make a company, a $10 billion company as big as Checkpoint that quickly, it sort of tells me that we're in early days of internet security, and that there are more solutions required, and the fact that their return on invested capital is so high, this is a pretty ripe area for entrepreneurship and innovation. Mixed with the fact that Checkpoint's stock is very cheap, apparently, and people don't think it'll ever grow. I'm excited at the prospect of being long Checkpoint. All right, so I give this model, just given the fact that you're sort of brand new to this, a C. But yeah, you should have added cash and subtracted debt. That's when you buy a company stock, you're also buying their cash. So I give you a C. Tim O, who often does great work here. Let's take a look at Tim's model. So I didn't know they're a geographically distributed company. Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, Juniper. Juniper makes hardware as well, so keep that in mind. They're not just security, they make routers. Checkpoint is software only as far as I can tell. Sort of very traditional model here. Do some kind of breakdown. You get the same upside as me. Everybody getting the same numbers. But the question is why? That's why I talked about capital efficiency. Why is this company able to spend no money and bring in a fortune? I want to do that too. You know, why shouldn't I get into security software right now? You know, that's the question. You know, why shouldn't I terminate this live stream and just do security software? You know, that's, you know, because I want to put 50 million up and make 10, 20 billion, right? So there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of opportunity clearly in this space, and nobody's sort of getting to that point. Why is this software so important? Why can you have such high margins? It's easy to put in the numbers. I mean, that's brainless, right? I've taught you how to do that, and I'm glad I've taught you all how to do that, but why is the question. Why is this? And it's obviously about the labor, but the labor is embedded in the margins, right? So you have sales and marketing. I can spend, if I have 400 million in income coming in, I could spend 150 million on my people. I understand the software company is about people, but I can go find those people, pay them a lot of money, and start a similar company to Checkpoint. Look at Palo Alto did it too. This is a gold mine industry. So yeah, this concept that as the internet becomes bigger, it's sort of by entropy has to become more disorganized and more vulnerable. That's the kind of thing that is the reason companies like Checkpoint will always exist. It's going to be very interesting to look at this company closely, but clearly this is a company that's got quite a bit of success. Let's read this press release together. New Checkpoint research reveals enterprises battling 9 times more unknown malware. Employees download new malware every 4 seconds. So there's certainly a lot of threats from maybe Eastern Europe or Asia or places where you can make a lot of money just if you're in Romania or something, you know how to hack. You probably make more money hacking away at somebody's system trying to pay your rent. This is happening every day. We saw that the Bank of Bangladesh. I don't know if you guys saw this. Bangladesh hack. Yeah, here we go. The 2016 Bangladesh bank heist. And this is the new crime. Instructions to steal 951 million from Bangladesh Bank, the Central Bank of Bangladesh, were issued via the SWIFT network. 5 transactions issued by hackers worth $101 million and withdrawn from a Bangladesh bank account at the Federal Reserve of New York succeeded, with 20 million traced to Sri Lanka, since recovered, and 81 million to the Philippines, 18 recovered. The Federal Reserve Bank blocked the remaining 31 transactions, amounting to 850 million. That is quite a hack. Obviously, if you steal that much money, you're probably going to get caught. But that did happen. So I'm going to note that here. Bangladesh hack. Pretty amazing. And stuff like this, I would imagine some stuff like this happens quite a bit and is not reported. They have different insurances and other things that maybe would stop it. But this is one small, it's not small, but one notable public cybercrime. But cybercrime is going to become, arguably much, much more important than... This is funny. The hackers tried to transfer the money to Shalika Foundation, but spelled foundation wrong, which Deutsche Bank saw and halted the transaction. So that's a pretty funny mistake. But you can see that a lot of these cyber threat actors are not in the U.S. They're often maybe to maybe be a little bit stereotypical, right? They're from all kinds of different places. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of such hacks a year. So Deutsche Bank did the right thing for once. Very funny. Enterprise value is market cap minus cash plus debt. But when you're valuing a company, you have to include their cash as your asset, right? I think it's expertise, RSA chic. People want to buy software from a company they trust instead of building it all from scratch in-house. But at some point, if you're a large enough company, you may want to just create your own cybersecurity division as opposed to outsourcing it to and paying a fortune, paying through the nose. Checkpoint. So let's keep reading here. All right, employees download new malware every 4 seconds. I know one malware where people will send an invoice to our accounting department, and it's like, please pay this invoice, and it looks like a real invoice. And they try to check that we actually got that invoice. But if it's $700, you may just pay it. I mean, you're a big company, you don't care. $700, just pay it, move on, check it later. And if you have, sent that hack to 1,000 companies or 10,000 companies, and 100 of them paid you, or 1,000 of them paid you, that's $700,000. That's a good hack. So how do you stop that kind of thing from happening? Well, it's not easy. One of the issues is that you have the companies themselves, right? The software companies that create the software, like the Microsofts and the Googles, they have to sort of exist as security software companies themselves. So let's keep reading. Phishing attacks continue to rise in volume and impact in 80% of the businesses surveyed, while with hackers preferring email and social engineering to deliver threats. So this concept of hacking the mind, that social engineering is about tricking people basically into their human mistakes. That you could have the best security software in the world, but that's how they hacked the DNC, for instance, using the so-called social engineering. Checkpoint today published findings from 2 research projects, the Checkpoint 2016 Security Report and Exploits at the Endpoint. SANS 2016 Threat Landscape Study, revealing critical challenges and key recommendations for IT leaders as businesses continue to build up protections against evolving cyber threats. In the company's 4th annual security report, Checkpoint researchers analyzed the activity of more than 31,000 checkpoint gateways worldwide, revealing details on what enterprises are accounting in known and unknown malware attack trends, and the impact of more mobile devices in the enterprise. Additionally, researchers were able to measure that this impact successful breaches have had on organizations and the added expenses that go beyond remediation costs. In the recent study, conducted in partnership with security, education, and research group SANS Institute, let me go to the SANS Institute, bookmark that, and check this out. And this is how you would become familiar with this kind of software in marketplace. It's very different from any other kind of software, so you've got to slowly and carefully kind of learn it. And could take you years, but if you're going to make investments in this space, you especially if you're going to be starting a new company, it's a good idea to do so. Obviously, it's a requirement. All right, researchers surveyed more than 300 IT and security professionals across the globe to uncover the threats organizations encounter in the real world, when and how they become incidents, which type of threats have the biggest impact, and the greatest challenges enterprises face in protecting themselves. With billions of new connections formed every minute, the world is more globally linked than ever. Innovations like cloud, mobility, and Internet of Things, there was a big Internet of Things hack recently, are changing the way we deploy, the way we consume, the way we secure technology. More and more malware is being put in our ecosystem that traditional security techniques are powerless to prevent. Given this, staying a leader requires being one step ahead of things you cannot see, know, or control, and preventing attacks before they happen. Both the Checkpoint report and the SANS landscape study present a comprehensive view of the entire threat landscape from the network to the endpoint, offering key findings including unknown malware continues its exponential and evolutionary growth. Researchers found a 9x increase in the amount of unknown malware plaguing businesses. This was fueled by the employees, who downloaded a new unknown malware every 4 seconds. In total, In total, there were nearly 12 million new malware variants discovered every month, with more new malware discovered in the past 2 years than the previous decade. Wow. Security is lagging behind the speedy, on-the-go mobile device. With smartphones and tablets accounting for 60% of digital media time spent, businesses and mobile devices present both an access curse and a business productivity blessing. While employees do not want to be the cause of their network breach, 1 in 5 will cause one through either mobile malware or malicious Wi-Fi. Endpoints represent the starting point for most threats. Among the business surveys, endpoints were the most common cause of breaches and the most critical component in cyber defenses, with attackers leveraging email in 75% of cases. So what that means is that the information user at the desktop, the so-called endpoint, usually desktop, is going to be the place where it's breached. It's not the network, it's not the server, it's not the places where you would normally think, oh, let me hack into the server, and that's going to be the best place to get in. But it's coming through the front door, if you will, through the user's access point. Email sounds like 75% through email. Pretty amazing, huh? 39% of endpoint attacks bypassed the network gateway firewalls, and routine operations uncovered 85% of threats after they had already gotten inside the enterprise. All right. So there's some resources here. I'm going to try to follow these and get to know this better. Let's read the next one. Checkpoint research reveals surge in ransomware in August. Interesting. Checkpoint today revealed that both of the number of variants of ransomware and volume of malware attacks were on the rise in August, as the company revealed the most prevalent malware families attacking malware.
Hello.
Hello?
Can you hear?
During August, the number of active ransomware families, I'm not sure why they use that terminology, grew 12%, while the number of attempted ransomware attacks increased by 30%. Let's see here. The top 10 families: the Configure worm that allows remote operations and malware download. The infected machine is controlled by a botnet which contacts its command and control server to receive instructions. These are interesting virus names: Hummingbad, Ztor, Triada, Sality, JBoss, JMX. Businesses face a catch-22 situation when it comes to dealing with ransomware. If they don't pay the ransom, they lose critical data and valuable for good. If they do, they only encourage cybercriminals to utilize ransomware more. To nullify this, organizations need advanced threat prevention measures on networks, endpoints, and mobile devices to stop malware at the pre-infection stage, such as Checkpoint's Sandblast zero-day protection. Let's take a look at that. Checkpoint Sandblast. Let's try to hack it. I'm kidding. Threat emulation sandboxing. Traditional sandboxing was designed to help with these kinds of threats, but cybercriminals have evolved their techniques, creating evasive malware that can avoid detection by many sandbox solutions. As a result, many organizations find themselves taking reactive steps to counteract infection rather than preventing it in the first place. To get ahead, da-da-da-da-da. Be interesting to read the transcript of one of their conference calls. See if that's going to be available. Go to the investor section. Take a look at, see if we can get conference call or something like that. We can even Google Checkpoint transcript, earnings transcript. Let's try that. I'm kind of curious what they're seeing in their business. Let's take a look here. frustrating. I think that will work good. Interesting. Can you elaborate, Jackson? Funny, John. Yeah, I mean, they're saying the business environment is still robust, but the numbers are kind of what matters. I'm just going to take a 2-minute break. I'll be right back, guys, and we'll keep going through checkpoint.
Advanced techniques beyond blacklisting and whitelisting to
Let's start again.
Checkpoint threat emulation was designed specifically to prevent zero-day attacks. Threat emulation performs 4 key steps in addressing new attacks. The first step is inspection, where files and email and downloads are identified for processing. Checkpoint applies advanced techniques beyond blacklisting and whitelisting to filter out safe files using heuristics and a proprietary analysis engine, leaving only suspect files selected for emulation. Next, the selected files are uploaded to a virtual sandbox on a local appliance or in the
join me
cloud.
on my YouTube.
The virtual sandbox is a protected virtual environment that prevents infected files from escaping into the open when the files are launched for testing. In the emulation step, The file is opened and monitored in multiple Windows OS environments and Microsoft Office versions. This means that older systems that still rely on XP will be protected, as well as more modern OS versions. Changes to the file system or registry, or unusual activity in network connections or system processes tell us the file is malicious. Files identified as malicious are blocked in the prevention step. Malicious files are stopped at the gateway before infecting the network. No infection means that remediation time and effort are eliminated. Before Checkpoint's solution, malicious files would reach and infect user systems while the files were being analyzed. The business could be compromised for hours or days. If you are familiar with the jump from intrusion detection to intrusion prevention systems, Checkpoint is making a similar move, leading the evolution from detection to prevention, stopping zero-day attacks and new threats, not just detecting them. In the final step, newly discovered threats are fingerprinted, with signatures, IP addresses, and domains for threats sent to the threat cloud. Once the threat information is in Threat Cloud, they are instantly available to protect other gateways. The 4 steps, inspect, emulate, prevent, and share, stop undiscovered attacks. Now let's see threat emulation in action. Say you receive a resume from a job posting or through a referral. How do you know that it's safe? Let's run it through threat emulation and see what we get. This is what a threat emulation report looks like. Check file system activity and notice Google Service.dll and Google Services.exe files appear innocent. But they are malware. Why would a PDF need to modify, create, or even touch these files? Check the system registry and notice that Internet Explorer registry keys were being modified. Why would a PDF need to do this? Look at system processes. Has IExplorer.exe started? This could be a sign of a future man-in-the-browser attack. From network connections, note that this is not talking to an Adobe update server. This is likely a command and control server communication. Checkpoint threat emulation identifies these behaviors as malicious and stops the threat before it infects your system. The discovery and prevention steps happen within 1 to 2 minutes. We use patent-pending technologies that have been proven to emulate over 250,000 files with 0 false positives. We built in file inspection heuristics such as positive elimination of files that assure that only suspicious files are emulated, completing the process as fast as possible and optimizing performance. Try it now. Submit a file for testing via email or through our threat emulation portal. For more information, contact a Checkpoint sales representative.
Cool. Yeah, so one question is performance, right? So if every email I send is checked, I'm sure that's not exactly how it works, but it's something to think about. Gil Shwed, the greatest hacker of all time, probably. All right, so this model, you didn't add the cache up correctly. They have $3 billion in cash, so that's a F right there. These are good sort of tidbits, the Reddits, so forth. Yeah, guy looks pretty badass in that fake photo, I'd say. Yeah, missing $3 billion is something that apparently a lot of people have trouble with. Only forecasting 2% revenue growth is not a surprise if you don't get upside. No discussion, robust discussion of the products. Let's keep looking. This is Sam's model. I thought it was trash. Sorry, Sam. You're fired. All right, Andrew M. ODS. What's an ODS file? That looks like a hack itself. All right, Andrew, let's take a look. I like that you guys have found these different Reddits and communities, IRCs, discussing Athenaware. Was that a joke? Is that a thing? Wasn't that
That was that Nick.
that kid? Yeah, I don't think it's I think that was a joke. I mean, if he has a successful security software company, God bless him. But I think it's a joke. This model is pretty poorly done. You need more practice. Stephen Paschuk. Take a look. Alright, this is a little bit better. He actually goes through each appliance, each series, 4000 series, etc. Number of sessions, VPN throughput. This is what we're talking about. You should just format these numbers, not that hard. Which is the better album? Tough call. Very tough call. They're both great. Yeah, just format your numbers, in a way that makes sense is a good idea. Freeze panes is, basic stuff in Excel. But most importantly, forecasting revenue growth in a more intelligent way would be nice. One way to do it would be to look at, add up all software security revenue and just ask yourself, is that the right amount of money you need to secure the internet? Your Checkpoint, Fortinet, you've got a handful of companies. Does it make any sense that that's, securing all the business activity that's moved onto the internet through one little company? That's why, Palo Alto has been so successful so quickly. Michael Flanagan, of course, the best in the business. Let's take a look at what he has to offer here. Blue Coat was acquired, I believe, right? I remember when Blue Coat was public. Last Line, Blue Coat, Fortinet, these are interesting. Dell. Yeah, I would imagine Checkpoint's major customers are the Fortune 500 type enterprise. You probably got a similar valuation to me. Yep. Let's see. Wonder why mine's quite a bit higher, I think. Very similar. I guess I have 2 billion more than you do. Who could possibly be at my door? So my friend has come over. So we're almost done here. Let's continue to take a look here. Rob Casanau. This could be a little bit more interesting. Yeah, no, this is good. Again, without a robust, analysis of the products. Again with the cash mistake. Harris. See how Harris did. Not much upside. Only 2% revenue growth, that could be why. Not much analysis. DNC should hire us. Funny. Cool. All right, guys, I think that's it. Interesting company for sure. I hope you learned a little bit about sort of the way I look at things with respect to capital efficiency. Seems like they have a really unique position that is hard to replicate given they're sort of embedded in a lot of companies and that they see these threats and then can react to these threats quickly. But I still like, I think that's sort of a protective moat that the market doesn't seem to be appreciating. So I like the stock. So let's see, for next week, maybe we should pick one to work for next week. How about VMware? Let's do Workday, WDAY. WDAY. So you can email me your models at shkrelimartin@gmail.com. WDAD, the company is called Workday, software company. Look forward to seeing your models, and this time do a little bit more analysis of the actual company's software product. It's hard to forecast growth in something if you don't know what they're doing. So I think that in some we did a pretty poor job of understanding the product offering, which I think we could have done a much better job of. So in any event, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining. See you next week, next Sunday.